Always nice. And so welcome to our third session of this program series about the Jewish American institutions around the United States. It's great to see familiar faces coming back for more. We've been kind of focusing on the West Coast. We're in the West Coast again. We're the Washington State Jewish Historical Society. We have Lisa here. Lisa, though, has some connections to the East Coast. She lived on the East Coast. She went to UPenn as well. She settled in Washington in 95. She is the executive director. She's been there for quite some time. She helps with exhibits, anything you think of. Executive directors are like superheroes for the museum world. She also teaches at the University of Washington Museum Studies.
Yeah.
And so I am looking forward to this one. And we also have one more coming up with the Jewish Historical Society of the Upper Midwest as well. So I look forward to that and seeing everyone there. And then I'm going to pass it to Lisa. You're in for a treat. Enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hold on a second. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Kranzler, and I'm the executive director, as Jessica nicely said about my intro, from the Washington State Jewish Historical Society. And Jessica, is there a speaker view? I have Marilyn is okay. Let me see. There we go.
So it should click speaker and it should pop up.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I'm very happy to be here, and it just turned afternoon for us too. So I come to you directly from our Jewish Federation's Connections event. They have an annual women's event, and it's of course virtual again this year. And so I'm very pumped up. We had just had a speaker from Israel, a chef, Jamie Geller, and she shared some wonderful Israeli recipes with us. So I'm anxious to try them, and they look yummy. And I may have to go down and make something after this for lunch. So, but I'm happy to be here with you. And I do hail from originally Rockland County, New York. Just a bit about my history. I went to school in Philadelphia. I lived in Boston. I moved to Chicago with my husband, lived in Louisville, Kentucky for 5 years, and have been here for 27 years in the Seattle area. So this is home. I have 3 kids, grown kids, and the youngest is in medical school. 2 are on the East Coast, 2 medical people, and I'm very, very happy. I am thrilled to be the executive director. I mean, being the executive director, like Jessica said, is sort of like I have a cup. Someone gave me a Wonder Woman, because you literally are doing everything. But that's what makes it so fun. It's you know, and any of you that have done any volunteer work, whatever, there's so many things going on with museums and historical societies that we are it's like it's sort of a dream. My past life, I was a CPA with a master's in taxation, and this kind of married my creative work with the running a business type of thing. So we get to do so many things, and it's interesting because I listened to your past 2 speakers talk, and the American West was all online, and the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience is a creative museum in New Orleans, and it's terrific. We are a hybrid, I call us, in a way. We don't have a physical spot like a home museum like you have in New Jersey, which would be kind of a thrill, and I'm very envious sometimes. But in some ways, we what we have is our offices are in our JCC on Mercer Island, and we have a wall, and we can put up different exhibits. But I like to say that our exhibit is in the state, and Washington State is very diverse. It tends to be Seattle centric, like east of the mountains, west of the mountains. But then there's another whole parts of the state that we really are working, and especially over the next few years, to get out to Spokane and over the mountains, and Bellingham north, almost near the border of Vancouver in Canada, and then to the southern part where the state capital is in Olympia, and even more south near Portland. So we have a lot of geographical spread, and that makes it interesting. So the first thing I want to say, and I do have a PowerPoint presentation for all of you. So I'm excited to share that. What I wanted to say is my talk is a little bit different than your last speaker, who told totally chronologically about the history of the Southern Jews, which was totally fascinating. I will tell you a little bit about the history part, and then we'll show you a lot of our work. And through our work, you'll get to see, you know, some of the history out here in the Great Northwest. So, and then along the way, if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. That would be great. I love chatting, and I can multitask. So I really appreciate if you you know, want to have any questions. So I just want to say that the first Jews here that were documented came to the Northwest Territories, the territories before it was a state, around in the 1850s. In fact, it was about 1850. Sort of a young explorer type person we named Adolf Friedman came here, and he was doing some trading, some fur trading and adventures, sort of like, you know, a young lad. And then, you know, really the first Jews began arriving between, so the 1850s, and it brought German-speaking Jews from Europe over here. And then there was 3 waves of Jews, and then 3 distinct waves, actually. The German Jews, and I'll tell you why I say that, because it's very interesting. The distinct Jews were the German Jews who arrived like in the 1850s. The second wave was from 1880 to about in the maybe 1924, actually, were Yiddish-speaking Jews from Central Europe. Okay, and the third wave was started around in the early, like around 1902, when the Sephardic Jews from Turkey and the island of Rhodes, speaking Ladino. Okay, so it's Judeo-Spanish, Ladino, and they arrived. It was totally, it wasn't like a very cohesive Jewish community. It was very segregated. In fact, when the first Sephardic people arrived, and I don't know if you know much about the Sephardic, but I'm from you know, Eastern Europe. Although now I'm an adopted Sephardic, I have been told, because of all the work that we've done, which I will share with you. But the Sephardic community is amazing, but it's very different, and everything's different. The customs are different. They name their young, their babies after living people. Okay, they have different foods. I mean, they have different sounding names, right? When I first moved here, I had young kids, and I had in preschool, I was like, well, I don't understand why all these Italian type people were in, you know, my daughter's preschool. And it turns out like Calvo, I mean, Capilotto, you know, just very different kind of sounding names and people. And they came from the, and actually what's very interesting is when they came here, they established 2 synagogues, one for the Turkish descent people and one for the people from the island of Rhodes. And there are the 2 synagogues still today. In fact, over this past COVID period of time, they tried to have a merger and they just couldn't agree still. Now there's, you know, nowadays there's intermarriage. When I say intermarriage, there's intermarriage between the Turkish people and the Rhodelizis. And there's intermarriage between, you know, Sephardic and Ashkenazi, which was a very big deal when that happened. And we have some documentation about the first ones, and I have the first ones that intermarried within the Sephardic and the Ashkenazi, the first ones that intermarried between the Turkish and the Rhodes. So they're very strong traditions. And that meant that the people that were here, the German-speaking Jews and the Eastern Europeans, did not recognize the Sephardic Jews when they first came here. And there's a lot of stories about that in our archives. So I just wanted to share, because it was very distinct, but one thing they had in common was to create Jewish organizations that would be, that would create, you know, the need for for Jewish settlers and helping to settle, and the Hebrew Free Loan Association and the Jewish settlements houses and that kind of thing. So they did have that in common, and they created a school together, Talmud Torah, but they kept very distinct with their synagogues. So that's just a little bit of the history part, and we can come back to that a little bit more. But I wanted to start the presentation with telling you a little bit about our historical society. So I think I can share. Let me just double check. Share sound and share screen. So I should be able to share, and I should be able to do this. Okay. And if you don't see what you're supposed to be seeing or what I'm talking about, please let me know. So we are, our organization started in 1968, and it was actually an offshoot of a women's group of the Jewish Federation of Greater Seattle. And it was very volunteer, and this is not uncommon. I think that your first presenter, Jews of the American West, talked a little bit about historical societies starting and the formation of, gathering this information. Is very important to started thinking about recording people. And we did the same thing in 1968, and in the early 70s started recording oral histories and established a relationship with the University of Washington Special Collections Libraries. And we have the Washington State Jewish Archives there. And so we have over 500 oral histories, thousands of digitized photographs in the photographic collection, and like thousands of paper documents in the document collection that are not digitized but are accessible through and you can see the boxes, and you can even make virtual appointments with the University of Washington to explore a box or make in-person appointments, which are just starting up again. So basically, we were formed and we did all these oral history work, but now over the years, and they collected tons of oral histories, and the way oral histories were done, I don't know if you do oral histories at your museum, maybe put in the chat if you do, I'd be interested to know. But one thing that is important is that the way oral histories were done, and again, this was for all, many Jewish historical societies and other historical societies, was more biographical in nature, lots of questions, and sometimes cutting off, the what I call the narrator. Great, I see that you do oral histories for World War II veterans, which is terrific to capture their voices. It's very important, I think, to capture some of these voices of especially the elder people. And they captured a lot of voices, but a lot of it was like, when I go back to look at it, significant people in the community, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to look at, this person. And then I see they ask the question, but then they cut them off. So, when they were telling a very interesting part, right? And so if I was going to interview you, let's just say Marilyn, I see you first, Marilyn, I was going to interview you. I would want you, Marilyn, to author your story. So if I asked you about your, an important part of your life, or an important part of, something, what you were doing during a certain time period, but even now, which is, we're making history, which I'll talk about as well. I would want you, Marilyn, to be the one to author your story. And that's what we've switched to. And so we developed a new mission. And the mission is in 3 parts. And that's why I start here, is because we're doing all the work that many historical societies do. We're preserving and presenting the history of Jewish life in Washington. But the second part is the awareness and appreciation part. And I think that is pretty significant, because we are a historical society, but my motto is that we make history every day. And I think that's important, because there's in Washington State, at least, there is so many new transplants. I mean, think about all the technology firms, the startups. They're, besides Silicon Valley, we're the second place that all these transplants come. And so they are just coming, and they have come from all kinds of places. And we're like, so they're like, well, why should we care about the Washington State Jewish Historical Society? You know? And so I say, you know, well, because you're here now. Even people tell me, oh, I'm not from here. Well, when did you come here? I came here in 1916, and I raised my whole family. And I say, wow, okay, you raised your whole family here. Your kids are from here. When do you say that you're from an area? Now, I've been here 27 years. I mean, I'm still from, you know, New York. I mean, you can definitely tell in my voice. I can't, unless I take voice lessons and become like, you know, My Fair Lady, I can't change my accent too well, okay? Although I try in certain words. I'm very heavy in this New York accent, and I'm kind of proud of it. You know, I don't mind. So, and it's fun to connect with others in that way. So, and the third part of our mission is that we build bridges with communities. We build bridges with Jewish communities, but we also have been building bridges with other communities that share interesting and similar type of experiences that we have. So we have recently did, and I'll show you a whole exhibit, which I will be sharing on the Sephardic Jews and the community called the Central District in Seattle. And we worked with the Black Heritage Society. And we also do work with the National Nordic Museum for the Nordic people. There's some connections there, and there's some connections with the Wing Loop Asian Museum. And so we have a lot of different connections. We have connections with museums and historical sites all over the state, which really help build collecting, you know, these histories together, and serving also as an education resource, which is you know, really important these days, obviously. Okay, so we, as I mentioned before, we are a true family of strangers here in Washington State. We really don't have there is like the whole community that's been here forever, but we really have a lot of newcomers. There's so many people, you know, the Californians who came up here, the East Coast people that wanted to just try something different, the tech people. I mean, just so many different people that it's, you know, been amazing. There's, you know, obviously also we settled Soviet Jews in the 90s, and, you know, other groups that for humanitarian reasons. So we are a family of strangers. We do have a book called Family of Strangers. Can't see it that well here. It's on our website, and we are doing a major update to it. In fact, yesterday I worked about 7 hours editing the whole material because it's going into the copywriter. And this book is what I call the Bible of Jewish history, the Family of Strangers. It went from the 1850s to the 1970s when it was written 18 years ago. So this is the 18th high anniversary. And I'm excited to say that we have put an extra chapter in the book for the last 50 years of Jewish history. And I am just telling you, I am so thankful to the author, not the author of the original book, but a new author that I chose to do this, you know, 50-page edition that tells the story. It tells it in thematically, all the things that happen thematically, and it's going to be released on June 1st at a big event that we're having. And you know, so I'd love for you to you know, to follow along with us after, if you're interested about the book, and maybe, you know, the book will be available to order, which is an amazing, I have used it. It's the Bible of Jewish history. So that's a little bit about who we are. And now we can get into a little bit about what we've done. Okay. And what we've done is important because that kind of will tell you more about our history, because obviously we're doing programs and interesting, unique programs that present our history in unique ways, and also, you know, bring new people in. We're very inclusive, non-denominational organization. So just this past year, this is just this past year, and in a way, COVID, as bad as it's been, has been in some ways, in some small way, a blessing to us, because we went entirely digital. And we were able to do everything and reach so many more people across the state. And I think, in general, historical societies and museums are finding that a lot of people want to be reached in a hybrid way for the future as well. So we have these things called history happy hours, and we had a wonderful presentation around Martin Luther King's day, where we talked to all the work being done between one of the big temples here, Rabbi Daniel Weiner at Temple 𝘑𝘠𝘓 in Seattle, a big temple that did not leave the central district, which is important when we get to the Sephardic Tour. And he does a lot of work with Pastor Carrie Anderson from the First American Methodist Episcopal Church. And it's an amazing relationship. They have back and forth services together. Well, we're here as the Historical Society to document, now again, not only the past, but also what is going on in the community, what is relevant today. So that's what gets me excited, to be able to talk about relevant history. And this was one program that we did. Another program that we featured was with a fellow who grew up in Seattle and lived in 5 different homes in around the neighborhoods. And he also went to one of our local treasured high schools called Garfield High School, which is like a melting pot. It's a true melting pot. They had the Jewish people, the Black people, the Asian people, all the different people together. And it's like, to this day, a very special place. Some very famous people came out of there, and like Kenny G, the jazz saxophonist, went to Garfield High School, and many other people that are like that. I had a list when in the history happy hour, so you could always take a look at that. The third history happy hour that we did this past year was actually with a fellow. Does anyone know the show called Somebody Feed Phil? You can put it in the chat if you've heard of it. Somebody Feed Phil. Phil Rosenthal, this fellow, goes around the world. At least he did before COVID, and maybe he's starting to go again. And guess what? His job is he eats. Okay. And so we had him. He's a high school friend of mine, actually. Actually, maybe not friend is a strong word, but he was one of I thought he was terrific. He was a couple years older than I in all the shows. And while I played in the orchestra, he was on stage, and he came on for a presentation with us, that also with a local radio show host, who talked to him about his eating and his food and his Israeli adventure. And we related it to some of our recipes. We have a major cookbook that we collected with all people's recipes that was also published. And he donated, instead of taking an honorarium, he donated his fees to our local food bank. So we do some special collaborative work with other organizations. And so lots and lots of things went on. Book club, we got involved with a tour in the summer in the Central District, where we had signs featured at our historical spots. And we were part of this whole, there was like 1,000 people there, and it was all outside, which was great. So a lot of different things. Okay. I'm going to share a couple of them. This is our Jewish museum. And so it's digital. And at first, of course, I was like, why can't we have a museum? But then I reconciled, we have a museum in the state, anywhere we want, with synagogues. We set up, pop-up exhibits, whatever. And let me start by growing the digital museum. So we started in the end of 2018, and now we have over 40 exhibits. And they're really, really very well done. And I'm going to share this one with you. I hope this works so I can actually, let me just see. Here we go. This is the latest one we just did, and I did a presentation last Monday evening about the Samus Foundation, who is an amazing education based grant maker in the city, but it came from a fellow named Sam Israel. who he was very eccentric. People either loved him or they hated him, but he did a lot of saving of some of our downtown Seattle buildings because he purchased them all. He was very much into real estate, and the reason was because his parents, I mean, they couldn't buy anything when they came. They couldn't purchase anything as Jews. They were always turned down. So buying real estate was very important to this fellow. And we have his whole, this is like the way we do our museum sometimes. And we have, you know, all different sections and very important, you know, you can read through it. And then we have like a living history, a section of what the organization is doing. And then what we do is we have, in this case, we put all the voices together and all the people talking about this fellow. It's really tremendous. You can hear all about it from each person about Sam Israel. This fellow here talks about him, and I'll share one of these with you.
When the original Washington Mutual Tower was built, the owners wanted to buy the Gallant Seneca building, which is where 2U is now. And Sam wouldn't sell. So I had spoken to him at the time because I knew the people who were trying to acquire it. So it was just a great interchange, pure Sam Israel. Not for sale, not for sale. The person says, I need to buy it. And I loved his answer. Your problem, not mine. Then he said, okay, I'll lease it to you. I'll lease it to you for 25 years, but the lease has to be on one piece of paper. A giant envelope shows up in his office with a 50-page lease, mails it back unopened. he did a 25, he said, look at what's in a lease, how much you're gonna pay me, what the rent increases are, and if you miss a payment, I get my property back. What's so complicated? So he was an astute businessman. And he did lease that property, and the Washington Mutual Tower had a protected view for really over 35 years.
So basically, each of these people tell stories about Sam Israel, and that's what we try to do when we do a digital exhibit. We get a lot of material. We get material from the archives sometimes, and then the new material of people who knew these people. So a lot of our history is both, you know, the older material and really bringing in some new voices. So we have this kind of collection. So that's what's in this wonderful Sam Israel exhibit. And let me see if I can go back. Okay, let's hope. And this exhibit was about Herb Bridge. I don't know if anyone's heard of Ben Bridge Jewelers, but this guy is the descendant of Ben Bridge. I think he's the son. And he was an admiral, and we have a whole exhibit on him. Amazing. And what we do is in our historical society, my middle name is named Collaboration. And so we do a lot of that. So for the Herb Bridge exhibit, we were able to collaborate with the Museum of History and Industry in downtown, just north of downtown Seattle on Lake Union. And this is in the Welcome Hall. So even though we don't have a museum space really of our own, we are in, like I said, a lot of places. So this one is in the Welcome Hall of a major museum that used to be the Armory, built by a Scottish-born Jewish architect. And I remind them all the time, and I get a lot of collaborative relationships with them. In fact, we're holding our big event there, knock on wood, on June 1st. So it's a tremendous museum. And if any of you come to Seattle, please text me. I'll remind you where you should go and what you should do, because it's one of my favorites. So let's see. The next thing I want to talk about is the Sephardic Studies program at the University of Washington, and this fellow, Devin Narr. And I need to just put on make sure you can hear this. I'm going to play a special podcast, part of it anyway, and I want you to listen to this. It's about the introduction for the Sephardic Tour. This is Sephardic history now in the Central District. And then I will show you the tour that we did, which anyone can do in their area as well. So I think it's really a great template. And we're going to use it to go around the state and mark other Jewish neighborhoods. But here I want you to listen to a little bit about the Sephardic Tour, a few minutes.
Seattle is a bit is a bit of an outlier in many ways, insofar as it historically had a very disproportionately large and dynamic Sephardic community. In the case of Seattle, as many as a third of the Jews in the city were Sephardic by the start of World War I, which is very unusual by American standards, according to which perhaps less than 5% nationally of Jews historically have been Sephardic Jews.
That's Devin Nahr, the Isaac Al-Haddaf Professor of Sephardic Studies at the University of Washington. He researches the history of the Sephardic Jews, those who were forced to leave Spain during the Inquisition of 1492. The Sephardic Jews spread throughout the world, many landing in the Ottoman Empire, in the area that is now Turkey and Greece. Many of these Jews eventually made their way to Seattle, which currently has the third largest Sephardic community in the United States. Some 20% of Seattle's 63,000 Jews say they have a Sephardic connection.
There's a Sephardic community in Seattle, which serves as the flagship Sephardic.
Listen to him tell the story of the first two Seattle Sephardic Jews.
In the early 1900s, in this case, it was early 1902, there was a Greek merchant seaman who was on a ship. His ship stopped in Seattle because it was laid up for repairs. But he lived in the village of Marmara, on the island of Marmara, in the Sea of Marmara. This is the sea that divides European from Asiatic Turkey. He went back. He's sitting down with a group of friends and strangers, whatever, telling the story of his travels on that ship, and also the story of Seattle. It's a beautiful place. It looks a lot like Marmara. And the two Jewish boys listening to them, Solomon Calvo, Shlomo Calvo in Hebrew, and Yaakov Polikar, Jacob Polikar, said, "Would you be able to take us back with you?" Sure, if you want to come. And they did come to Seattle in 1902. Solomon Calvo and Jacob went down to the waterfront, and they're saying, Yehudi, Jew, I'm a Jew in Hebrew, or Yehudi. And there was a young boy by the name of Jacob Kaplan who thought he knew what they were, who they were. So he said, Yehudi, Yehudi. So he brought him to Rabbi Jacob Gens, Genss, who was he was the rabbi of the Ashkenazic Bikur Holam congregation. And he heard them talk Hebrew, prayer book Hebrew. It didn't sound like anything he had ever heard. They took off their fringes, tzitzit, showed them, well, that's something Jewish. They showed them their tefillin, phylacteries. They've got all the accoutrements, but something's wrong here. So somebody said, we're going to write to New York, to the authorities in New York. They wrote back, says, you can feel comfortable with these young men. They are Sephardim, and so you can trust them.
Ike grew up in Seattle's Sephardic community, which originally was centered in what is today's Central District. Here, he describes some of the stops along the tour.
14th and Fur, the northwest corner, which is Washington Hall. Washington Hall is still there, and that plays a big part in the history of the Sephardic Jews, because it was used not just for overflow services on high holidays, but also for performing plays in Ladino, or also, as it's known, Judeo-Espanol. In 1916, it turns out that Yom Kippur fell on Shabbat. They had a house on the corner of 15th and Fur that was being used temporarily as their synagogue, and they were hoping that they could eventually raise enough funds to build a synagogue on that corner. But what they would do every year is hire Washington Hall as an overflow area for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That year, Yom Kippur fell on Saturday. And so it was in the middle of the afternoon, and the people that ran Washington Hall came in and said, "Okay, everybody, out." "What do you mean out? We're in the middle of services." "I'm sorry, we have a dance going on tonight." "But we haven't finished." "Sorry, you've got to leave." It was very embarrassing for them, and they took an oath that that would never happen again. As it turns out, the following year, they had gathered enough money to start building. On the left side of Jack's Grocery was the Kavaneh, the Turkish coffee house of a fellow by the name of Avram Amon. I went in there once or twice, and they're playing sheshbesh or tabli or backgammon, which is a favorite game of theirs in Turkey, and they played it there as well.
The tour will take you to many more places, including the original home of the 3 Sephardic synagogues. 2 have survived: Congregation Ezra B'Seroth, started by the Jews from Rhodes, and Sephardic Bikor Holim, started by the Jews from what we now call Turkey. But they eventually moved to Seward Park, as a significant portion of the Sephardic community eventually moved further south and out of the Central District. Seattle's Sephardic community also played a big part in the famous Pike Place Market. Again, Professor Nar.
Go to Pike Place Market to see as a historic icon of the city, to see some of the continuing roles that very few, but once very many, Sephardic families played in the business and social life of the Pike Place Market. There's still one fish merchant of Sephardic background and a couple other stores that have Sephardic connections to them.
Before embarking on your tour, I think it's important for you to know a couple more things about Seattle's Sephardic community. First off, the community originally did not mix well with the Ashkenazic community. In fact, Sephardic community members didn't always mix well with each other. Regina Barkey Amira, my aunt, tells what she found when she came to Seattle from Rhodes in 1946.
I married another Sephardic. It happens, we fell in love.
Was that something
But remember, I was from Rhodes and his background is Turkish. So at that time, there was a little difference also.
Was that a big deal? The fact that you were from Rhodes and his background was Turkish?
At that time, it was. But for some reason, most of our friends, that's what happened. They were with Rhodes background through their parents mostly, and others had a Turkish background, and there wasn't really that much difference, but sometimes they made a big deal out of it.
You understand that at their closest point, Turkey and Rhodes are only 12 miles apart, correct?
Yes, I know. And my father was born in Turkey.
So you were half Turkish.
No, I'm full Rhodeslia because I was born in Rhodes.
Okay. I find it interesting that there's such a distinction. Was that
there was at that time, no more.
Okay.
The
other important thing to know about Seattle's Sephardic community is that there's a serious effort underway to preserve the Ladino language, which is dying with the last generation to speak it at home, those born before the 1940s. Professor Gnar's department has put together the largest collection of Ladino books and documents in the United States, assembled from the basements, closets, and bookshelves of the Sephardic residents who lived in the houses and worked in the stores you will see on the tour.
And it is a testament to the dynamism of the Sephardic community here in Seattle.
Ladino includes many special sayings that don't always translate to other languages. Regina recalls one.
Okay, here's one.
Okay.
We always say, if it's a long distance, you're talking about a long distance, you'll say, well, huerco, where the devil shaves. So that means it's far away. But if you say it in English, it doesn't mean anything.
The language continues to evolve as it moves from one country to another. Though it is mainly Spanish, Ladino has picked up bits of Turkish, Italian, and Hebrew as it has moved throughout the world. That evolution continues even to this day. Is there a word for podcast in Ladino?
Yeah, podcast.
Do you think that the native Ladino speakers had that in their vocabulary?
I would suspect not, considering nobody had that in their vocabulary until quite recently.
So the fact that Ladino is an amalgamation of multiple languages,
Yeah,
I think it kind of fits into the Ladino structure to add
absolutely.
language.
Absolutely.
I mean, a new word.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent.
Actually, yeah. And you're a podcast chia, which would be a podcast maker, a female podcast maker. So,
Did you make that up right now?
I just did right now. Yep. You're the first podcast chia in the history of the world.
As you can see, we're continuing to make Seattle Sephardic history even now. We hope you enjoy the tour.
Okay, I'm back. So I just I had that idea yesterday to have you learn a little bit about Sephardic history through the podcast that we made for this tour. Because really my friend Cynthia Flash, we wrote the script together, and she had that whole history, and she is very interesting. Her mother, the podcast woman's mother, the narrator, was on Rhodes with her family. And, you know, things were happening in Rhodes, and she needed to get her family out. She wrote for a series of years to an uncle that lived here in Seattle and owned a curtain company, Seattle Curtain Company. And his name was Mr. Capilouto. And he basically, over a period of years, they had to have sponsors to get out. And so he was able to sponsor them, went to Washington, D.C., and they got all kinds of letters, and they were able to sponsor this family of, I think it was 7 or 8 people, and they got them out. But they got them out, interestingly, through, everyone got out in different ways. They got out through Morocco. And they had to live there for, you know, in a one-room place for years before they were able to then get sponsored to come to Seattle. And this was her mother. And so she has a lot of history. She wrote a book called Hugs from Afar. And she found basically, she had in her possession letters that her mother had written to the uncle in Seattle. And they were all in Ladino, and they were translated. So it was quite fascinating history, and really tremendous. And I encourage you to come on to our WSJHS.org, WSJHS.org, to look at the Sephardic Tour, because each of these numbers open up a tour site and have people talking about it as well. So it's pretty interesting. We did it like using Google Maps, and you know, we intend to do this around the state as well. So it was very well received, and we had 3 overlapping tour stops with the African American, with the Black Heritage Society. And we, on one of them, we all went outside. This was in July. So it was before, almost probably before things started spreading back around. And we were able to go to this Black church called the Tolliver Temple and all be outside. We had presentation outside. Lots of people from the community, from the Black church community and from our community and from other historical societies came. And a couple came who actually were married in the 60s in that what was a temple and now is a Black church. And they welcomed us, and I went to services in there and got to speak to their congregation. And it was an incredible community building opportunity, and they welcome us back anytime. So building, again, part of our 3-part mission, building bridges with other communities. So now let's see, I want to go to the next one. And let me see how to do that. There we go. I wanted to talk to you few other things. I hope you're learning some of our history through our digital museum work. One of the other things that I felt was very important, and I am very active in the Council of American Jewish Museums. It's an organization, and they have a lot of members around nationally, but also internationally. And they put on a lot of conferences, and there's a lot of collaboration work. We had talked a lot about documenting the history of today. So we're all living through, right? I mean, we're all part of history. And if we ignore that, we are losing that. People, I had done a lot of research to look into what happened in Seattle area and Washington State in the 1918 flu pandemic. And I'll be honest with you, there's not all that much. And so how do we document this today? And so we felt very strongly about
the goal of the Washington
Listen to
State
this.
Jewish Historical Society is to save the stories of the current time as well as the past. An example of this is Haggadah Stories, telling your story in the time of coronavirus.
Okay, so basically, there's that. And
Haggadah Stories, part of the Washington Jewish Museum, our digital museum, is a collection of narratives from individuals telling how their lives have changed and how they have adapted during the pandemic. The stories are about holidays, businesses, students, teachers, medical professionals, and Jewish organizations. For his story, Matthew Coopersmith talks about how he changed his tutoring company to work with his students virtually. In this example, Cindy Lincoln explains how she had to temporarily close her fine art studio, and she has been using the time to find projects for her staff and to connect with family and friends and to have time for her own artwork. One of the medical stories is an interview with Dr. Susanna Block, who talks about her job as a pediatric hospitalist during the pandemic. Here she is pictured in full PPE. Molly Azos, an elementary teacher, submitted a video she created for her students to teach them how to add tens. We also have the story of Sadie Howard, who became a bat mitzvah in her backyard and celebrated with her family and friends on Zoom. Several Jewish organizations submitted their stories in the spring, including this one by Chabad of Shoreline, detailing their COVID-19 relief program and their Pesach at Home kits. Several synagogues and Jewish organizations have documented their virtual events and the ways they are serving the community. These stories are a living record of what life is like today, and in the next 10, 50, 100 years, will provide our story to future generations. We still need more. There are life cycle events that have not been saved in Haggadah.
so basically,
Not every synagogue and organization is represented.
I'm trying to get to the next slide. There we go. So I just wanted to share that we are collecting stories of today. Temples that have gone, it seems to us that it's like, oh yeah, that's happening, commonplace, but it's really significant shift in history where temples can now broadcast their services. I've gone to services all over the country, in temples that I had belonged in when I lived in Louisville, in Chicago, in New York. I mean, quite fascinating, and to be a part of that. And that is something that we never were able to do. So we're all living through a very historical time. And I think that temples and synagogues in the future will be digital, and we'll all be able to attend this. I could never have presented to all of you, or you could never have learned about all of the different groups that Jessica has nicely been able to bring in together. So I will share a few more things and then open up for questions, just to show you the depth of what we've done with our digital museum and what is possible. We have an exhibit about the Soviet Jewish experience. We brought here a national touring exhibit from the now it's called the Weitzman National American Museum of Jewish History in Philadelphia. And we had this at our University of Washington Hillel, giant panels, and we did a companion exhibit to the local stories of Seattleites, and we did interviews of some of the people that had escaped, the refuseniks had actually escaped and been helped by our Jewish Family Service and other organizations here. National Council of Jewish Women, that used to be here, was very helpful in supplying furniture and that kind of thing. So anyway, that's in our Jewish Museum. We also featured 20 remarkable Jewish women. I mean, we picked 20, and of course that's picking anyone and excluding anyone is really not what we usually do, but this was a 50th anniversary celebration for us. And Sue Bird is half Jewish. She's a famous basketball star on the Seattle Storm, just retired. And we had Nancy Pearl, the famous librarian, who has an action figure. Susan Levine, who was the ambassador to Switzerland here under Obama. Lots of different people, and each of them have a story, and you can look at that in our digital museum. We also encourage the community to submit stories, and we get that, and we schedule time to talk to us about constantly collecting additional stories, older stories. We're starting a 90s club for like people that are in their 90s to make sure that we get their stories as well. Lots of things going on. This one, we're doing a lot on social media, which is important for any museums and historical society. Really talking about fun stuff that's being shared, and also all the history, Hanukkah songs, all of our featured events. Tough to keep up with, but a lot of fun too at the same time. And just very quickly, we did a major exhibit with 170 panels about all the businesses in the Jewish businesses. And this exhibit was then recurated thematically and went to a 6-month stay at the Museum of History and Industry here in Seattle. And also then it was curated to be to have the businesses that were just the Sephardic businesses, and we took that to Spain. So that, I have to tell you, was a highlight of my almost 16 years with the Historical Society, when the University of Washington decided to pick this exhibit up with a little New York prodding by me to take it to Spain in their study abroad center, where it lived for a year and traveled around Spain. So we were very excited about that. And we have all these publications. This was the cookbook I referred to. The Distant Replay is an amazing book of Jewish sports stars in Washington State. And it's not a teeny little pamphlet like they talked about on the movie Airplane. It is a great big publication with tons of athletes, sports owners, and sportscasters, and really, really incredible team managers as well. And then this is the Family of Strangers book that I was showing you a little bit before, that we are updating with a new cover and a new chapter for the last 50 years of Jewish history in Washington State. We also have a chronology that's through 2015. We try to update that every 10 years. A ton of work by our Jewish Archives Committee, and gives a lot of history of everything Jewish that's happened. Oh my gosh, my assistant put our cover of the Family of Strangers. So don't tell anyone. You are the first ones to see this. It's like a draft, and the colors may change slightly, but you are the first ones to view this. Wow, I can't believe that it's on here. but don't tell anyone, keep it confidential. And just also there's access to, if you want to see more in the Washington Jewish Archives, all kinds of oral histories that have access, searches on Jewish documents, photographs, just an amazing collection. This is just an example. When I do a search of oral histories, I can get to any one of the oral histories, play it, and read the transcript. So I do a lot of research in the archives when we do digital exhibit curation for the museum, digital museum. And lastly, I mean, this is just incredible research. Again, what's in there on photos and other stories that we can get. And I think that might be, let me see, there's one more slide. Oh, that goes to the actual University of Washington collection. And let me get back to this. And last slide. Whew, I just made it. It's 12:59. Sorry for the long-winded thing, and I hope you enjoyed it, but my whole motto is we make history every day. You're making history too by being here, and I'm so happy that you are here. I see someone wants to have the podcast, so I will make sure that to drop that in the slot in the presentation in a minute. So let me get to that. Here is the link to the podcast. Actually, what I want to show you is, hold on 1 second, and I'm going to go to here. This is the link, the Sephardic Tour, and you'll see, put that in the chat for you all, and you'll see, the podcast link, just one section down, you can listen to the podcast. So, I have enjoyed this. Let me hear if you have any questions. You can turn off your mutes now if you want. We can unmute.
All right, Marilyn, let's see if you can go on. You'll start us off. Let's see, is it working for you?
Just unmute.
Yeah, she's got it. Okay, well, if anyone else has a question, we can wait for you, Marilyn. Okay, Larry, we'll go to you and then we'll go back to you, Marilyn.
I just want to thank you for your presentation and what a marvelous job your museum is doing. It's so exciting, so replete with ideas and programs and the like. It's so vital. And it's very exciting to hear this. I had a couple of questions. One is a substantive question for fun, and then perhaps I can ask two. I know you were talking again about Ladino, and you were talking about your trips and spending time in Spain. So included in that, do you go into the music? Because I know that much of flamenco has its roots in Ladino music as well. And I'm wondering if you've looked at the musical side of that.
That is an excellent question. We have looked a little bit about that. We have this fellow who I talked about and presented in the podcast, Ike Azos. He is a Hazan, Isaac Azos, and he created an amazing CD collection and liturgy that he rewrote, and that's one of the reasons why the Sephardic two temples, the Turkish and the Rhodes, have so much trouble merging, because they have their own music, their own traditions when they, and that's why it's really impossible right now for them to merge, although I think it's financially the way to go. But that is a very good question, Larry. I think that we could definitely do more, especially with an exhibit. And Ike Azos is 92 years old. So it would be, and he's, I think that I feel like getting on that right away. We have another cantor who maybe, I don't know if she's actually she just retired, and she had an amazing collection of Sephardic songs and whatever. And that really is important and could become, that's why I love our digital museum so much, because I can just add a section on like Sephardic, Sephardic music. and resources and that kind of thing. So there might be some resources actually in there, but if there are not, then you brought up some more work for me. Thank you.
Thank
That's really great. No,
Thank
that's
you.
really great.
If I could ask one more question, people know I could ask about 20 questions of you here. It's phenomenal, your presentation and what you do. Just a question from a little different angle. In terms of reaching out to a younger part of the community, again, our experience here is that older people, to some extent, follow us and are involved and support us. But
Right.
to reach out to the youth and to the young families and all that, what is your experience in that regard?
That's also a very good question. And, one that we thought for a long time. How do we attract the younger people? A few different ways. We had a teen historian program, which we have teens doing oral histories. And so actually I have a teen that I just talked to on Zoom yesterday, and she's going to be helping us with a short video that we're creating for our event. And then we're also going for state funding. So we're going to use that video for that piece. And doing a 3 to 5 minute video, you think it's like easy, but it's like incredibly difficult. So I've had some young voices talk before. We did a program 2 years ago called 13 Counts. And what that means is that, so it was in conjunction with, I'll be honest, like it's all about me. No, I'm kidding. It's, I had my 13th year celebration with the Historic Society, and they were saying, well, let's honor you, Lisa. And I said, I don't really want I want this organization to be sustained long-term, right? I don't want this to be about me, right? So, I do a lot, but so I call this program 13 Counts. 13 counts for me, and for also in Judaism, obviously 13. So we had a lot of young people come to our presentation, and we had presentation of their bar mitzvah projects, just getting them involved. And I explained that these were part of our Jewish history, all the work that they're doing. So I think there's many ways to get young people involved. They got excited about that, and some of them became our teen historians doing oral histories. And then the next thing we did this past fall, and we're also about to start in March, is we've gone into the temples, and we've done some education programs with and now with Zoom we're able to go to Spokane, which is like a 4-hour drive from here, east of the mountains. But we're able to we have an education presenter to about oral histories and about our work and about getting them involved, and why the importance of capturing this history. So I think we have tremendous more work. I always think of more things, like I want to go into all the camps, and I'm like, Lisa, okay, you cannot do everything at once, even though we try. So it's also a very good thing. But one other thing, Larry, that I want to say about that topic is that you're always talking about how to get young people involved, right? And it's important, but we still very much sometimes forget when we're going in many directions that it's the older people and the people that are in their 50s and 60s that we really want to grab, because they're busy also in going in many directions, but they will become the base of people that we have in the 70s and 80s. And I think it's very important to really focus on them right now too, and making sure that we get them, and then their parents, who are the 90s part of our 90s club, they get them interested. So there's a lot of different people you can get interested, but you only can do so much. So sometimes I want to do much more, and I want to do it yesterday. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I
sure.
have a question. It's Marilyn Kaz. I want to tell you that I'm overwhelmed. I had no idea about the Sephardic community, none whatsoever. It was a real history lesson and beautifully done. Now, you had a whole section on how people are coping with COVID. What about anti-Semitism in Seattle? And what are you doing to protect the temples?
Yeah. I think that's a very good question, Marilyn. And I've been in discussions. I just finished a 3-week. There was 3 separate presentations in a conference with the Council of American Jewish Museum on anti-Semitism. And so they had the entire history of anti-Semitism, lots of different speakers from different communities, not just Jewish, from the East Asian Pacific, part of the Smithsonian. And we really did a learning. We are doing a lot here in Seattle. Sadly, this continues around the nation and world. And we just had an incident this past week, very close, like across almost across the street from the Jewish family service, with a very hate speech, hate writing, and the city painted over it, but you can kind of still see it. So in part of our new mission, Marilyn, it's very important that we collect this present time. And like we had a whole discussion in the council, this is very interesting, whether we collect anti-Semitism work, whether that should become part of, because whether we focus on that. And I think like we also need to focus on our Jewish response to it as well. So there's a lot that needs to be documented. And my gosh, I can be absolutely overwhelmed. I need like 5 grants immediately to do this work. My goal is, I was thinking all along that I would bring out some of the anti-Semitism that is already existing in our collection and do an exhibit that way and maybe bring it up to the present. But that is on the list.
Also, I have an ignorant question because I'm very ignorant. Tell me some more about Rhodes. What is Rhodes? I know it's an island. Is it Spanish? Is it French? Is it
it's part of Greece.
It's part of Greece. That's what I thought.
But it was part of Turkey. Okay. But it was, and there was a lot. I'm not an expert in that area, although I should learn more about that. I actually have a trip next October, let's just hope, to Greece, and I'm supposed to present at the Rhodes Museum of Greece. So I am hoping that can turn out and I can bring some of this work over there in person. So, maybe we'll have an update next year on that a little more.
Very interesting. You do a great present. I'm just overwhelmed by Sephardic Jews. I had a Sephardic. Nice. Unfortunately, we lost contact with each other, but she spoke Ladino when she would bring over dishes to eat that she made or invite me over for dinner. It was very delicious and different.
Well, that's lovely. That's really nice that and a lot of people, I have to be honest, like I said, I really didn't know very much about the Sephardic culture or anything when I moved here. They eat different foods at Passover. It's quite fascinating. And I have to say, I love the foods. There's a lot of B's. There's barekas, balemas, bizcocho. I've been in cooking classes with my friend who did the podcast, who was the narrator. And it's just incredible culture and very cohesive, very, very, just lovely people who want to keep this culture alive.
Well,
this
morning on the Jewish channel, I saw a young girl who was an Ethiopian Jew. She's now a doctor, but how she came over from Ethiopia with her family, and and the color problem and the language and the custom.
That's another whole.
That's another one.
That's another whole issue. And we have, the rabbi from the Central Synagogue, Rabbi Angela Warnick-Buchdahl. She was the cantor, and now she's the rabbi, if anyone knows her, from the Central Synagogue in New York. She's from Tacoma, Washington, and she's Korean, and she grew up, going to temples, and they always like, "What are you doing here?" Type of thing. And she, if you haven't heard from her, she has a sermon from Yom Kippur in 2020 that went viral, talking about this issue, Marilyn, about Jews of color. And I would highly encourage you, I can send the link after, but to listen to her Rabbi Angela Warnick-Buchdahl. It's like Buchdahl. Yeah.
The Central Synagogue in New York, the rabbi is Asian, an Asian woman.
That's her. That's who I'm talking about. Rabbi Angela.
Yeah, yes.
That's exactly who I'm talking about. And her sermon from Yom Kippur 2020 went viral. You can get it on YouTube.
Yes.
And it is incredible. And she is, we just got her oral history.
Oh, wow.
So I'm very proud. Like it was months of coordinating, maybe like 6 months of trying to get a date. And we just got her oral history recently. And so I'll be going through it for, obviously curating it, and then we can, who knows what we'll do. I'll probably have her speak and do an exhibit on her, So anyway, I have to run. I actually have to go to an editing session for this book that we're updating. And then I have the video session in another hour. So, I mean, it's supposed to be a weekend. But I'm very thrilled. I'm obviously, you can't do this kind of work if you're not passionate. And if you don't, even as a New Yorker, I've been here now 27 years. So I'm not going to say that I'm from here, but I'm going to say that I'm pretty darn proud of raising my kids here and having this Jewish tradition and doing everything in my power to make it stay alive, sustain this organization, the history, and eventually pass this torch on in about 5 years.
Wonderful.
So,
Thank you.
So it's been a very big pleasure I'm going to just drop my email in the chat too. If you have any follow-up questions,
Would you
we're
please-
small.
That would be fine.
That would be great. If you have any follow-up questions or comments to me, please send me, because I could present it to my board on Tuesday night, and they would love to hear any feedback too. So, Jessica, I really appreciate the invitation. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
And I hope
Really insightful.
I hope you've learned something. And I know I learn every time I present or talk or meet with people, and it's a pleasure to learn about your museum too, that I looked at when I was researching who you are. And it's a pleasure to see you, and hope maybe someday, I can stop by.
Yeah, so I hope to go to Seattle or Washington in general just to visit. So I'd love to.
Anyone who comes to Seattle, let me know in the future. And it's just a pleasure to meet all of you. Thank you so much, and have a lovely rest of the day, Sunday, and enjoy the Olympics. That's making history too. Thank you.